7 o'clock, let's go, huh?
Oh,
Brian will not be here and Steve.
Saw that, okay. Call to order the EDA meeting, April 18th, 2022. First item on.
So moved.
Second?
second.
Any questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Right, item 3, approval of the March 21, 2022 EDA meeting minutes. I'll take a motion.
I move we approve the March 21st, 2022 EDA minutes.
Second?
Second.
Any discussions, changes, questions?
I'll be abstaining from
Okay.
voting since I did not attend that meeting.
All
Right.
right, we've got Mr. Mundell abstaining. If nothing else, I'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, 2023 EDA budget discussion.
The Economic Development Authority and City Council are required to approve and submit a preliminary levy to Anoka County by September 30th of every year for the city EDA budget. The 2022 budget levy was $136,200. The EDA balance as of March 31st was negative $89,979.88. The negative balance reflects the $120,000 transfer that was made to the general fund in January of 2020. The city will receive the 2022 levy settlement amounts in installments from the county in July and December. These payments will make this account whole and provide an approximate balance of $30,000 at year's end if there are no additional expenditures for this year. Staff recommends the EDA set a levy that is at a minimum equal to the 2022 amount of $136,200, so the same as for 2023. The amount is used to support executive director, the community development director, finance director, and administrative support for EDA related work, EDA projects, and marketing efforts. In 2021, the total market valuation of all properties in the city was $1.45 billion, which could produce a maximum levy of $264,006. But staff is recommending that the East Bethel EDA recommend a minimum 2023 budget levy of $136,200 to City Council. So it'll be the same as last year.
Comments, questions from anyone?
Was the Finley report part of this expenditures for this year?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Okay, that was my question too. If we needed to follow up on this and do additional investigation, would we have similar type funds?
Next year we would, if we want to do some follow-up.
Okay,
This year, if there was a need to do that, I'm sure we could find somewhere to transfer and make the transfer and reimburse that other fund once budget year 2023 starts.
okay.
And will Anoka County be reimbursing those funds?
Well,
Because
that was a discussion we had. I don't know if you all see it, but Samantha Markman, the AC Red director, has resigned, so.
I did not know that.
Effective May 13th, she's going to go to work for Excel. We'll have to see what their commitment is, but there's also, even if they don't go forward with their proposed study, there's CARES money we think the county still has that could be retroactive use for funds to pay activities back to 2021. We think we might be able to access to pay.
Okay.
good.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. So, any other questions or comments, or? And we're looking for a motion to approve the amount?
I had a couple
the
of thoughts.
recommendation.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I know this is a little bit early. It seems to me that we did this about the same time last year, but I was thinking that even if we made this recommendation for the September, boiling all the numbers down for the city council to get to the county as a preliminary levy, if we have a change in that amount between now and whenever the city finalizes their budget, we could raise or lower that amount. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, up to, I believe it's the September meeting, once we have the
The
preliminary.
first meeting, yeah.
Up until that point, we can raise it. Once we have that meeting, we cannot,
Right.
but we can lower it up until the December meeting. We have that option.
Mhm. Then my next question was, how can we transfer $120,000 when we didn't have $120,000?
It's based on the overall amount that's in the general fund. We know that we will get these funds at the next settlement time in June, December. So we just make that all at once at the first of the year and then allow these other funds coming back to the county.
So how much are we paying ourselves in interest? Just,
Probably what a savings account.
$0.0150.
Yeah. But Stephanie, as you said, so 136.2, if we did that amount, we would still, based on what we did last year, we should end up with about 30,000 in excess for
Yes.
this year.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that the EDA recommend a 2023 budget levy to support the EDA efforts of $136,200.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Any further questions, discussions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5, the Finley Engineering Broadband Internet Study discussion.
Thank you, Julie. Chris Konecki with Finley Engineering reviewed the draft city broadband gap analysis report at the March 21st, 2022 EDA meeting. The primary finding of the study was that East Bethel had more internet access than was previously assumed. The collection of data to determine this access is based on the FCC 477 process, which is described in pages 31 through 33 of their report. This method for determining access has many shortcomings, but is a starting point to define the internet service providers that serve a particular area and the speeds they claim to deliver. Staff is requesting the EDA discuss this report and formulate any comments and/or questions to submit to Finley Engineering in advance of their update to the draft report. We would anticipate the final report will be presented to the city at the end of May 2022. With that, I will open this up for any comments or list of questions that anyone has. If we can address them here, we will attempt to do so. If not, then we will send them on to Finley for a complete answer.
I have kind of a overarching question. So when I look at the methodology, so it looks like Finley, I mean, they have all of the coverage maps from the different sources, and they overlaid all of those to come up with the areas that are gaps. But it didn't seem like they were really, I don't think the word is comfortable, but confident in the methodology that some of these companies use to create their areas of coverage as it relates to the data and the census tracts. So I'd be curious what their solutions are, what their comments would be. I mean, obviously we can't go in and talk to every single household, but I mean, if they've got some thoughts about that, or if there's a way to further clarify, okay, so it was this census tract and you just included everybody. I mean, is there a way to track that? And that might be, sorry, a way general question, but that was just my overarching.
And that's essentially the major question that I have.
Okay,
And I think it's the question that outlines the point that we're trying to get here. And I wrote mine out because I couldn't remember what I was going to say. But, you know, by definition, the city has only 313 homes that do not have access to 120 Mbps service. However, meeting the definition of service and reporting advertised speeds probably overstates the actual speeds and availability in the city. Due to the inaccuracies in the reporting, this isn't from Finley, this is from the sources they use, and it's primarily the very broad definition that the FCC provides these people as reporting requirements. We believe there are many pockets in the city that are either underserved or unserved. Assuming this premise is true, and would be my question to Finley, how do we do further analysis to develop a procedure to identify these areas? Because even though we show most of Midcoast service areas being served, again, FCC's interpretation of this, if just one house in one of those census tracts meets that 25-3 definition, they consider the whole tract served. And again, also too, when it's reported to them what speeds that the ISPs are providing, they will accept their advertised speeds rather than their actual speeds. So I think this leads to a lot of areas that probably are not identified as being served or underserved. And we feel that they are probably substantial. And the big reason that we want to try to do something on this is going to affect our ability to apply for certain grant funds. So I think the next step, at least in this, is to discuss with Finley, get some recommendations, and they had talked a little bit about taking this, to take it a step further, to do an actual survey. It would probably be best to have somebody design it that's familiar with this type of thing so we can get some accurate results and send this out. But that's the question that I want to ask them is, what's our next step? You know, we show all these areas that are served. And what I have up here, this is the state map, which is, they look at it, their definition is a little stricter, but they still show several substantial areas of service that we believe that there are people in these areas that don't have service. And we know a few certain areas where this is true, where there's no service, but I think it's probably more widespread than what's reported by the ISPs and the FCC.
yeah, because if you look up those census tracts, they're big.
They are, some of them are huge.
Right. So I was just looking out of curiosity my own address, and it's like, wow, that's huge. So for them to just be able to call out a particular statistic and call it a day for that whole area, that's interesting.
And well, just to kind of touch on that, if the majority of the city is covered with, was it 318 residents not being served, why do we have so many complaints? And
Exactly.
that led to doing this study.
And, you know, in the report, there was also an interesting map too that showed some things of actual speeds, that the average was something like 70 megabytes per second for download and 10 for upload. Now, the current thing is 25 and 3, but the new standard is going to be 100 and over 20. So we're not anywhere near of meeting that for those areas. Now, we all know too that some of the speeds are going to vary a little bit. There's probably some statistical deviation that would be acceptable in that. But I think most of some of the areas that we have that I would consider underserved or unserved, even though they may have some form of internet access, it's at such a low speed that it makes it probably not real functional.
I couldn't tell. One more question from me, and then I want you all to chime in. So if, what's my question? So if satellite is available, do they consider that availability or coverage?
No.
No, okay. That was what I was wondering.
Yeah, satellite and wireless aren't required to provide those statistics to the FCC at this
Okay.
time.
Dan, you had a number of questions.
Yeah, I did. I'm just gonna look at the middle of this, list. We talk about a passive optical network. The passive optical network is, basically run through a network operating center, I think is what they said. So you've got the center and you've got the optical, network running off of the center. When I had that set up at another location where I had internet via that, it had to be line of sight. So the antenna from the network center, operating center, to my location had to be a line of sight. And my question on that is the passive optical network that they're talking about dependent upon line of sight for connectivity? Because if there's a tree in the way, or a house goes up, or an apartment building goes up, and now you don't have the line of sight, how does that work? So that was one question that I had.
Dan, it was my understanding, and my understanding may be incorrect. This is a question we'll forward to Finley for a definitive answer, but the PON network did not depend on line of sight. That was more for all the wireless alternatives.
Okay.
They definitely depend on line of sight.
Okay.
What I read and.
Well, what
my
throws me
interpret-
off is that the word optical.
Yeah,
I think it's referring to like the fiber.
yeah, it's the
Okay.
lasers.
There's a laser.
Okay.
That,
And
it's a laser.
I read that as they would run fiber into the neighborhoods to provide this, but it's gonna be from different rings.
Well, they talked like 30, they were serving 32 homes in
Yeah.
a network and that type of thing. So the other thing that I was looking at, and it had to do with the satellite system, the Starlink especially because it's a low Earth orbit. Because of the high Earth orbit latencies, if you're 22,000 miles up, it takes a while for that transmission to go up and come back down. With the low Earth orbit satellites, there's no latency at all based on what I understand it to be. And I'm thinking about financial investments of companies into fiber optic networks. I mean, when I moved out here, cell phones were not there. So everybody had a landline. We had US Worst. It used to be called US West, but then it was US Worst. So then, so my thought process is, okay, are we gonna be relying on fiber network moving forward in the next 20 years? Or are we gonna be relying on the heck with the cable, the heck with the copper, the heck with the Corning where fiber optics, we're gonna go. So when you look at the investments that the companies would have to make, I have a wire running to my home that was laid by US West. That's dormant. It's not used. My phone, if I have a phone at the house, it's VoIP, voice over internet provider. So, in terms of dollars and cents, how do you approach that from a service standpoint moving forward into the next 20 years,
As to how quick the technology will change.
Yeah.
Is it a good investment to do it, put money into it, or?
Elon Musk put the Starlink satellites over into Ukraine so people could communicate.
Yep.
Like that,
I think the other question that's probably gonna determine that is, what is the cost gonna be, satellite vis-a-vis fiber? From the numbers they've given us here, it looks like they're using a figure just for their basic market penetration estimates is $60 a month. Currently, Starlink service is $99 a month. Now, is there gonna be changes in that? I'm sure there will be. If he launches 22,000 satellites, I'm sure there's gonna be some economies of scale in there that can
Sure.
lower that price down. And I don't know if there's a real answer to that now. To me, I think that if service in East Bethel is fully built out, it's still gonna be a combination of several approaches. And I think there's gonna be certain areas that even with grant funds, it's may not even be feasible to build and extend fiber into those areas. So, I think that's an evolving situation, and I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that question now, but we'll pose that to Finley and see what their response is.
Mhm. I wasn't sure that the history about the fiber was correct along Durant. Do you have any history on that? Because that was US
US
Cable laid that. I remember when they laid it, and I mean, they said you have access to internet now. It's like, whoa! And so I signed up right away, and the internet at my house was 5 times faster than in Apple Valley. So I thought it was fiber optic cable that they laid, not to the house, not to the street, but to the node, fiber to the node, and then they ran wire from there. Is that what they did?
I think it is, and that happened prior to 2011 or 2012,
Right.
because
Oh, yeah.
that's when Midco bought US Cable.
Oh, right, it was like 2006 or 2007 when they laid that. Because they're running off of that. They ran off of that north of, on Durant, north of 209th, up to 213th, and then they went west this way on 213th to service that new subdivision that possibly is going to be going in.
Yeah.
And they ran fiber optic through that area, and they had to be tying it in somewhere to some other fiber optic, or it wouldn't make any sense. So I don't know if they knew that, if Finley knew that or not, because they're talking about DSL, and I don't know. Anyway, the other questions were kind of rhetorical. Getting computers into all the homes that need them, Finley says there's a gap. Where are they drawing the fact that there's a gap? That was one thing I'm like, really? Okay, and then, they talked about users not being skilled, and, I refer back to my friend Brian, whose last name will remain nameless, who was somewhat technically challenged, but interestingly enough, this fellow set up Wi-Fi in his house. He's got his printer working off Wi-Fi and all this other stuff. And for somebody to set that up without having any technical background, it's great to have grandkids and those types of assists along the way. But I think it's my mom made me take shorthand. So, I've come a long way from taking shorthand to setting up networks. Did Finley, this kind of was scratching my head, because I don't know that they gave any examples of other cities that they did random surveys in.
They didn't provide any information on that.
I'd be curious to find out input from the other cities that they did random surveys, what they thought of some of the meat and potatoes and how they boiled things up for those other municipalities. So I think I've taken up enough time, so I'll close with thank you, Jack and Stephanie, and my fellow members of the council, EDA, to go through this guy here.
Tom, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah,
or
thank you,
questions?
thank you. Thanks for those thoughts, Dan. I agree, this is a substantial report. It took a lot of concentration to go through it all, because it was super detailed in many ways. I do have a number of questions, but I'm just going to focus on a few of them for our time here today. Number one, back to Dan's point about the PON, you're talking about oversubscription, and on page 79 they talk about the ratio that they're using is 32 to 1, giving residents at least a gigabit of speed. I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could get half that? You know, why, I mean, gigabit is a great goal, but if we could get half that, so would it affect their plan in their over financial plan of what it would cost the city if we'd up that oversubscription rate to say 64 to 1 or something like that? To me, it seems, you know, it's a lower goal. It's certainly not the end goal, but it's a lower, more attainable goal perhaps, and I don't know how that would affect the financing of it all. So that was one question I had. The second one, on page 101, they mentioned this a bit cryptically, and I wish we could have more information about this, and maybe Jack, you know something. On page 101, they talk about Zayo, and it's partnered with Anoka County to build a middle mile fiber network throughout the county. I'd love to know more about that. You know, how is that working? How is that financed? What was Anoka's investment? And is something possible for us? That was one question I had.
Can I give you a
yes,
quick answer to
please.
that? Back in, I believe it was 2016, I'd have to verify that date. Anoka County applied for and got several federal grants to run essentially just a backbone fiber to connect essentially all the government facilities in Anoka County on one broadband service. Zayo was the ISP for this, and they put up, Anoka County put up X number of dollars, and Zayo put up the balance. So this line services all government entities from Columbia Heights to Cambridge. The reason it was extended into Isani County is because of the college up there, and also the city of Isani has some service on this too. So it was funded. It was partial private investment and partial government investment. So there was that public-private partnership involved in this, but that's all it serves. Now they did say when they initially put it in that there would be opportunities to wholesale to other providers off this, but at this time they've never reached out to attempt to do that. So I think their initial idea was to put some additional nodes on there and then sell that access to Midco or some of the other cable providers, or perhaps the biggest opportunity would be, let's say if we had a large company that came in here that had access to that, that may be a way to serve some of their needs if Midco couldn't service them, or provide the redundancy they need, maybe with two sources of access to the internet.
That's good to know. I think that provides some important context for us for what things that we could do here. This was early at my time here on the EDA. I believe it was, is it Jacqueline, previous AC Red?
Yes.
She talked about Arvig and a possibility of them installing fiber along 65. I don't know if that's still a possibility, and I was a bit surprised not to see Arvig mentioned a single time in this whole report.
We haven't heard anything about Arvig now in about a year and a half, so that would be somebody that would certainly be important to contact, but I don't know what their intentions are on that. But that's a good point, and you know, we can definitely see if Finley contacted them, and if not, it certainly wouldn't hurt us to reach out to them too, to see if they still have any plans in this area.
Good. And lastly, I wanted to point to page 118. So my whole thing with this report was, this is the feasibility. This is going to kind of educate us on, is this possible? But on page 118, the first paragraph, he says, the goal of doing this study is to entice an ISP to be interested in serving the city. That was like a huge light bulb moment for me, because it's like, oh, I guess there's another really important point to this study. And so the question is, you know, is this meeting that goal? I have a very bleak picture of an ISP willing to serve our city from this report, given, you know, Midco's, you know, bravado in providing these awesome speeds that we don't have. You know, what ISP is going to look at this report and go, yeah, we want to help you out. That's,
Well,
I'm left with that question.
I agree with you, and you know, one of the other things they identified is, potential area of concern in the report was if Midco was the one that finally builds this out, then all of a sudden we have a monopoly situation
Right.
here.
Yeah.
And the possibility of attracting another company, even if we were able to get grants or do public-private partnership with them, is their earnings. They may be able to pay for the facilities, but what are their earnings gonna be? Some of these companies may not want to come into some of these underserved areas that are underserved because of lower population densities, because they may not get the percentage of earnings they need to make their balance sheets and satisfy their stockholders. So probably to your question, and I agree, it's probably gonna be pretty difficult to get another competitor in here. And, you know, you look at these maps and they show that some people have some service in other ways in the cities, but with the exception of the one that showed, this one right here, I was surprised with this, that showed that Comcast had a presence in the city, which I was not aware of.
Me either.
I don't think it is either, and we're gonna follow up on this and contact some residents in this area to see if they do have Comcast service, because I certainly wasn't aware of it. Now, we know Midco has an exclusive franchise for cable TV, but not for internet.
Okay.
But generally, all the new lines have been run by Midco or previous to them, US Cable, because they were doing some installation of cable TV service. But this was the one that really surprised me, because I didn't think that anybody else had this kind of footprint in the city. And here again, it may be just certain homes, and it could be related to something that Met Council had with that rapid infiltration basin. I don't know if there's some kind of service up there. I wouldn't think that there is unless it's telemetry back to their plant. But this looks extremely huge and was never noted before that they even had any service in the city.
What area is that? Do you know what?
This is 221st right here. This is the road to City Hall.
Okay.
And this is approximately 200, and, no, this is Klondike.
Yeah.
This is
I was gonna say.
Klondike. And this is East Bethel Boulevard. So it's bordered by Highway 65, Klondike, East Bethel Boulevard, and 221st.
I'd say the most populated area in there would be behind East Bethel Ice Arena,
Yep.
Ned's Lake area.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Be right in here.
I think that's probably inaccurate because Comcast, when they were trying to expand their operations, they were told they couldn't expand anymore because they were trying to do the TV thing, and so they restricted them and said you can't do more internet and all of that, so they stopped. And I just would find it hard to believe that this is true.
Well, we've had two conversations with Comcast in the past. One was several years ago, but the most recent one was when we renewed Midco's cable TV franchise here a little over a year ago. And we reached out to Comcast to see if they were interested in providing a proposal. And their response to us was no, they weren't interested in East Bethel at this time because our density was too low for them to do that citywide. And also they would probably have to buy the Comcast or the Midco infrastructure out. So, and at the time they never said anything about that they had a presence in East Bethel for internet. So this is one that really surprised me to show up, is having some type of service.
Yeah.
Now, was Comcast ever in the city historically?
Not that I'm aware of.
So that rules out old lines or old services.
Well, and you know, it would be fairly recent because there was no internet service probably until maybe the mid-90s at the earliest. So we don't really go back that far.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's another thing, we're gonna check that out to see if we can verify that Comcast has a
Okay.
presence here, so,
Yeah, maybe even reach out to Comcast itself
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
ask them if they can verify that. Give them this map.
That was the hard part, that if a bunch of the factors that they list in here prohibit us from getting what we need and they're inaccurate, how do we counter that?
I think we counter that by what we talked about before, is we have to go to the next step, which may be trying to identify areas that we feel are underserved and do these more in-depth surveys designed to gauge the degree of service that they have. And, you know, if we find out that there are lots of people that fall into that category, I think the loose definition that the FCC accepts on this is, you know, not enough to really make a determination whether there is ample service or not. So I think the next step is to find out, okay, what is really out there?
Right.
And this wasn't part of Finley's contract. They were going to do what the existing data that was already out there to serve. These surveys can be expensive, and they need to be designed by somebody that knows how to conduct this thing. And but I think that's one of the things that we'll be discussing is what's our next step to make sure that we're not missing something.
They indicated in the report that they heard from several businesses, but did they proactively reach out to the businesses? And do you have any information about how many they heard from?
They did. We worked with the chamber
Okay,
to get this information out. They had a survey form. The chamber distributed to all their members, which was 75 or 80 that they sent out. We also had a few others that we added to the list that weren't in chamber. We kept in contact with Finley, and they were slow on getting some responses back, so then we identified what we thought were a good cross-section of 20. And then the city sent out reminders and requests to them of the need to complete this survey. I think in total there were 18 responses. So, and it was a pretty varied cross-section from a large manufacturer. We included the schools in this. One of the schools responded. So it wasn't as many as we'd hoped for, but they said, you know, if we can get 20, they said going in, if we can get 20 responses, they would be satisfied with that. That would be enough to make some assumptions and predictions from that. So we got 18, which was pretty close, but we worked with Finley on this to get all those out and get them back in. The chamber helped us too.
anything else, Brian? Any other?
I did think it was
Comments? Yeah.
positive. On page 12, they brought up that there is some legislation going through, that there's they don't know if it'll go through, but there's a bill pending that would provide funding for what the bill called fiber line extensions. And it seemed aimed at places that had more limited scattered locations that they needed to try to fund. And they said they thought that those might be dollars Midco could access if they come through.
And, you know, and the other thing too, where I think we have hopefully some opportunities is, you know, it's pointed out that a lot of our system is aging copper wire, which deteriorates over time, that these things will hopefully be replaced by fiber at some point. So potentially maybe with the upgrades that Minco can do, maybe there can be some grant funds to come up to help them accelerate some of the replacement of their existing infrastructure that's running slow or has limited capacity, and we can work with them to try to access some of those funds.
Was there any mention of aging infrastructure, or what year that the majority of the infrastructure was put in this report?
No, they didn't have anything in here on the dates some of these lines were put in. You know, I think they did mention that some of it was 20 years old or older, and copper lines were subject to deterioration over a period of time, and their capacity to handle the data reduced as their age progressed. So I think that's another thing that we need to sit down. The other thing is at this point going forward, I think we've got a good relation with Midco now, but I think we need to sit down and make that much better. I do know that the representative that we've talked to with Midco has been very helpful to us, and I think that they would be willing to engage in some type of discussions. You know, currently right now we have access to that $150,000 grant that the county has. We'll probably be discussing this a little bit more after Finley's final presentation. We'll get a recommendation from the EDA, but we have that open until December of 2023 to apply for it. But there are probably some projects that maybe Midco has that are marginal, and they're just seeking some aid to construction to make those feasible to extend service, which could probably prompt, you know, the addition of maybe another, this could be some of that 80 or 90 homes they were talking about, maybe speed some of those up. But going forward, I think it's important that we talk to Finley and talk to them about this survey, talk to them too about what the possibilities are of getting grant monies to update any of the aging infrastructure that probably needs to be replaced at some time. And I think those are basically our next steps.
Yeah, it seems like the big issue is identifying the demand, identifying the gap, and figuring out how do we do that, because Finley's only one company.
Yeah.
So do we, I thought back to our business retention and expansion, business retention and expansion, how we had all these task force amongst all of us. And I mean, if there's a way that we can help within the city, I don't know if it would need to be more on a technical nature because there's speed tests, et cetera, but just throwing that out there for ideas as well.
No, and I think that's an important part of it too, you know, they talked about educating the businesses, that some of the businesses may not be aware that they may be actually have service opportunities maybe between two providers. But it's, you know, to talk to them and make sure that they understand what we're doing and get their support too. Anything we do, we're going to apply for grant funds. We're going to have to justify, you know, with speed studies, prove that they're underserved, and I think also the commitment from those people that live in those areas to want the service.
Right.
You know, and in order to pay for this, you know, the city's going to have to come up with some monies too to probably match some of this stuff on some of these grant monies. And, you know, we had a brief conversation about maybe doing some special assessments to help pay for it. It could probably be done like we do our petition for paving roads. We would just submit something to the neighborhood and say, we're looking at doing a broadband project here. If we do it, this is how much it's going to cost you. Do you want to petition the city to apply for this grant? And establish a minimum percentage that would be required to have the city apply for it. Because we know if we extend service into areas that there are going to be some people who will say, you know, I don't want it.
Right.
And they may be somebody that doesn't need it, doesn't care about it, or they use their cell phone to get their service from. So we're going to have to come up with some type of policy there, but I think we've got a fairly good model in place with the petition policy we used on getting people to approve a special assessment for a paving of a road.
I thought it was interesting, they brought it up in here and they said that they didn't know of any situation where people did that, where there was people. I thought that was odd. I have neighbors down the road that Midco came into, and Midco at the time when they came in said, will you pay this amount or whatever, they were gonna split it among a half dozen people, but in the end, at the end of the day, Midco never, as far as I know, billed anybody. They're billing them individually, but they never asked them to pay whatever. They initially came to them and said, would you? But then they seemed like they waived it, or they just covered it, or I don't know, but my neighbor said, no, we never wound up having to pay that, but we did get the Midco service and have it every month in our GLAD. So it was interesting to me that in here they said that they didn't know of a case where people did that, but you know, there is a cost to it. So I, you know, I would imagine a lot of people, most of my neighbors were trying themselves to try to reach out, and they were just told numbers that were way too big. They were told $10,000 or $12,000 or something to connect your home, and they were like,
Well, and you know, the other thing in there too, the other statistic that I think is, it's not discouraging, but it kind of underscores some of the places in the city. It said, you know, for each passing or each connection, it was generally figured if it cost in the $2,500 to $3,000 range, it was probably feasible, but it showed that the average for ours was like $7,700. So, and I'm sure that's from areas that are of low density. In that case, Dan, you know what you were talking about, those are the areas that may have to be served by certain other options. It'd be great to have some type of fiber all throughout the city, and if you're gonna use anything but satellites, you're still gonna have to have some fiber, even if you go to small wireless Wi-Fi. You gotta have a signal come somewhere for it to be transmitted. And all the people that are trying to use, I didn't know this, that there was no such thing really as 5G, but the 5G from the cell towers, I know a couple people that live close to one that they claim that they can get all they need for cell service, internet service from that. But, you know, fiber is going to be something, a certain amount of it's going to be required no matter what you do.
At the sunrise breakfast, the chamber breakfast last Thursday, Samantha Mortman, she spoke, and she was talking about the Anoka County analysis that they're going to do, and they're gearing it more towards the residential area, where Finley here did all the surveys through the commercial properties.
Okay.
So, yeah, so Anoka County is actually doing the survey through the residents, and that actually will be sent out to the residents. You were there, weren't you, Brian? Yeah.
Yeah.
She said within the next couple of weeks or by the end of April. And their main focus on their report too is the northern areas of Anoka County.
Good.
East Bethel being one of them, so, just so you know that too.
And who do they say they hired? Was it like step 9?
Design 9.
Design 9.
Yeah.
They were one of the ones that we interviewed.
Oh,
I
okay.
was gonna say
I
that,
think they were kind of like our second choice.
yeah.
But now, when Isani County did their broadband study about 4 years ago, they did a huge residential survey. And I think they got about, they said 20% response back, which is really good. And, you know, of those respondents, there were an overwhelming majority of those that wanted to service. But I think in there, it was gonna cost something like, I don't know, a huge, $100 million to do it.
Wow.
So, it's, what I would like to do is, you know, in terms of a residential survey, is make sure we define it to areas that we think are underserved or not served at all. There's certain areas of the city who have such low densities that, you know, we may want to exclude them, you know, even if they want to service, hopefully we can get it there. The city can participate in getting it there some way, sometime, but I think we're gonna have to concentrate on those areas that can support it and make it economically feasible in terms of the extension costs and satisfy the earning requirements of these ISPs.
So what are our next steps? So we're gonna
I
You'll
will
talk to Finley?
submit all these questions to Finley and ask
Okay.
them to address those, get us a response back. And they're gonna have some updates and edits to the final draft, and they will be hopefully presenting that final draft to the city. I'm hoping maybe they can do it once before the EDA at their May meeting and then the city council.
Okay.
And then maybe they can give us a little further direction on what are our next steps based
Okay.
on what our comments are here.
If we have further questions, Jack, should we submit them to you this
Yeah,
week?
just send them to me and I'll make sure they receive those.
Okay.
All right.
I will say this, this is probably the most information I've ever received from a consultant's report. There's a lot of good stuff, and of course, it just gives us kind of a stepping stone for us to move on. I didn't think this was gonna be the magic bullet that showed, hey, this is what you gotta do, you do this and you're golden, but, it is a basis for us to start in what are our next steps, and we'll have to define some processes to get there, but I think this is a really, really, really good first start.
Certainly lays the groundwork to help us figure out what the next moves are. So this was just discussion only, no motion
No,
required?
just discussion only. I just want to
Okay.
get your input, and I know I certainly learned more about broadband than I thought I'd ever
Right?
know. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, it was
Alright.
certainly a good discussion, so.
Yeah, yeah, we're all learning as we go along, too.
Yep.
Was there a test later on everything in this?
Yes,
Mm-hmm,
it's graded on a curve.
Yeah,
yes, yeah. All right, so should we move on to item number 6, business activity report? Ready?
Sounds good. Just a few updates. So Panagold, Country Hearth, they opened up the first week of March. And it's projected to create about 20 new jobs, so they're up and running. Aggressive Hydraulics, their CO should be issued anytime within the next couple weeks. We're right at the bitter end of it, to issuing that. The East Bethel Village Apartments, the second apartment building, the CO was issued on that last Friday. And according to Al Keller, the owner, he said they're at actually about 25 to 30% capacity. We had heard that they're a little bit higher, but he said about a third, so. Building permits to date, we've issued 6 of them. And I'm not sure if EDA knew, but we started doing online permitting on the city website. And that was just for permits that don't require any plan review, like HVAC, plumbing, siding, roofing, that sort of thing. Just to save time for contractors and stuff, and to help with the traffic at the window. And we are having quite a bit of contractors utilizing that online permitting process. So, and we get a lot of big thanks for that. A couple developments: Anderson Meadows subdivision, which is on Gia Street in Durant. That was approved last November, and they have 2 new houses in there, or 2 permits have been issued. We have Prairie Hills subdivision, which the preliminary plat is going to Planning Commission on April 26th. That's on 213th Avenue and Tippecanoe Street. That's 16 lots, row residential lots, and they're actually hoping to have the grading and road construction done by July of this year. We got another residential concept plan. It's in the vicinity of East Bethel Boulevard and 199th Avenue. It's a concept plan for 10 lots, rural development. Actually, that was to go to Planning Commission next week too, on April 26th. However, the developer called today and he's pulling it off the agenda. And one of the reasons too is there's another piece of land that's close to there that he may be acquiring too, and then doing the whole development. For our department, I mean, we're still getting a lot of calls regarding inquiries on land and lots that are available within the city for residential developments and commercial developments, industrial sites.
Oh, good.
Majority of them want sewer and water though, and we're very low on inventory on that, but it is nice to know that there are still individual residents and businesses looking to still move into East Bethel. Always looking for land to develop, but like I stated, a lot of them still want the sewer and water. That's it. If you have any questions.
My wife was wondering if Austin Street is gonna be extended north to 213th in some fashion or manner. She asked me that today. I said, I'll find out.
It will be accessible to 213th via the new road to that subdivision, because it will connect 213th to 209th.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, we'll move on to city council report. Brian?
Thank you, Julie. Things to note. This Thursday will be the Spring Town Hall meeting. Thursday the 21st, starts at 6 p.m. We'll have an informal session in the Senior Center. Come over here for formal Q&A and possibly a presentation or two if there are any of the local officials such as county commissioner or anyone from the Senate or the House or any other representatives. They usually like to make a little speech and entertain questions. At our last meeting, the fire chief gave a report of 2 accidents which involved a city vehicle and a county vehicle. One of them was a early morning crash. A vehicle gone off the road. The fire department did respond to it. They had one of their duty trucks or first responder trucks right on 65, partially on the shoulder, and lady was going a little too fast in the right lane, swerved to get into the left lane, went out of control and hit the fire vehicle. And that was when it was slippery out, one of the mornings where we had a sudden snowstorm and everything was gone by noon. The second one, unfortunately, had a fatality. Vehicle was traveling up 65 north, just south of Cooper's Corner, 237th, and they hit a slick patch and went into the median. Ended up being a rollover several times, and unfortunately, it was a fatality. The Anoka County deputies did respond along with the fire department, and for traffic control, one of the deputies had their squads on the southbound lane, and that was rear-ended because of icy conditions. So he wanted to address those, that there's not a scourge of rear endings going on, but an explanation of how either a city or county vehicle were damaged. So a couple more items. We approved a hire of a new building permit technician. This individual will be filling Desiree's position at a desk right back here in the community development desk, and Desiree will be promoted to a new position as, what is the title on that, Jack? Assistant accounting, assistant finance clerk. So good for Desiree, and be welcoming this new employee pretty soon. City Council is looking into the ice arena with more interest now to try to address some issues with it. Of course, we know that the building is aging, it needs some tender love and care. And so all city council members have had a personal tour of the building to show what some of the areas that should be focused on. So we'll be discussing that in the future, as well as the management of the ice arena. So with what avenue we'd like to go down, that would be most successful. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that throughout this year. It's not an overnight thing. It'll be a lengthy one, which is good. It needs some attention. And North Metro Animal Control is closing its doors to shutting down its business. We contracted with North Metro last November, I want to say. And so it came as kind of a surprise that only after a handful of months that this company is shutting down. It's not just giving up the contract for East Bethel, it is shutting down. So that's another discussion item that we'll be having, as if anyone is on social media, that they know that there are ongoing dog issues and with an ongoing animal control issues, and so it doesn't seem to be solved yet. So we'll look forward to more talks about animal control. And that's pretty much all I have. Looking forward to Booster Day, third weekend in July, I believe, or second. I think it's 16th.
I think it'd be like the third weekend. Yes.
Okay, well, it's one of
16th
the,
would be the third.
it's one of the weekends in July.
Right.
It's not the
Not the
first one, though.
Yeah.
We'll have a little bit different format with this one this year. As last year was the first one that we had in 2-3 years, and that was just an afternoon format, and it looks like we will try an afternoon format again, but we'll be including a parade in the afternoon, car show in the afternoon. I think there's 2 or 3 bands that's going to be playing. I've heard rumor of a burnout contest
Okay,
and fireworks.
all right.
So,
Getting back to normal.
fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Absolutely.
Julie, could I add one more thing to that?
Absolutely.
On April the 25th, prior to the city council meeting at 5:30, it's the annual local board of appeals and equalization meeting.
Mhm.
This is the meeting where if you have concerns, issues, or want to appeal your property valuation, this is the one you come to. It's the only time of the year that the city council can actually decide on that. The city assessor will be there, so if anyone wants to appeal their valuations, not their taxes, but their property valuation, that they've just recently received, then come to the meeting at 5:30 and present your case, and it will be considered.
Excellent. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.